Another great question we get all the time is, how long will it take to sell my business? How long's a piece of string, right? That if you ask that question to 20 different people who sell businesses, they're probably all going to give you a slightly different answer. Of course, there are averages and there are kind of typical processes that get run. At one extreme though, I've had guests on our podcast here who tell you, we had a discussion, got an offer, and we sold the business and wrapped it all up within 6 weeks. And I can tell you at the outset, that's not the norm. I've got other people who say it took years to actually sell their business. I think for yourself, if you're watching this, you need to recognize that there is what I would call a good framework and a good process to run, and that has typical timeframes attached to it. And you might be a little bit quicker or you might take a little bit longer, but recognize that this is a significant journey. And if nothing else, I'd want you to understand you need to plan for this to take some time, because there's nothing worse than thinking it's going to take 6 months and it takes 10, right? You're tired, you're worn out, you're frustrated, you're probably going to start making decisions and saying things you shouldn't say because you're not in the right frame of mind. Whereas if you plan for this journey to take 12 months and it only took 10 months, well, you're probably going to be quite pleased. You're going to be calm, you're going to be relaxed, you're going to be, you're going to have still some fuel in the tank should anything pop up. How do I run a process? Typically, pretty straightforward. Let's assume we've all agreed to work together. There are 3 core stages. Prepare for sale, there's buyer engagement, and then we move into due diligence and completion as the final stage. I always say to our clients, prep for sale is all about getting you ready. It's not changing the business, it's just building the assets you need, building out information memorandums, executive summaries, comms plans, buyer lists, data rooms, getting a team coordinated and organized so that by the time we pull that trigger and we start engaging the market, buyer engagement, there's nothing on our end that's going to slow us down or stop us proceeding into a deal with a buyer who might be ready to go, okay? So about 6 weeks to get you ready, and that's frankly, I'll have about 6 people typically working that process. So, if you're doing it on your own, without a broker, without an advisor, without a team, or quite frankly, even one broker on their own, they're going to be doing one thing at a time as opposed to lots of things in tandem. So I say about 6 weeks to prep. Buyer engagement, 3 to 6 months to get your offers. And then of course, due diligence, really, I always say allow about 3 months to get due diligence done. And of course, somewhere in there, you're bringing in lawyers to draft the contracts and get that part as well. So personally, allow up to 12 months to get a deal done. It might happen a little bit quicker, might even be a little bit slower in some cases, but just recognize this is a journey. You need to plan for the longer term. You need to pace yourself, manage your energy, and really manage your emotion, because that's the thing that's going to completely destabilize you and upset the whole process.